The opening lines of Genesis describe a starting state called tohu wabohu, a formless mass covered by darkness and a violent, chaotic ocean. This concept reflects the historical baseline for reality in the ancient Near East. Surrounding cultures, like the Babylonians, who recorded the Enuma Elish on these tablets, viewed the primordial state as a chaotic sea to be conquered. Cognitive psychology identifies a modern equivalent to this mythological chaos, a state where the brain receives sensory data without any capacity for pattern perception. Without the inherent ability to organize sensory inputs into a recognizable figure against a background, subjective experience dissolves. It becomes an unnavigable wash of light and color. In both neurobiology and ancient cosmology, the baseline of the universe is a hostile noise that must be forcefully organized. This creates a specific tension in the Genesis account. The text spends 3 entire days defining spatial boundaries before it introduces a single biological organism. In these ancient texts, creation is the imposition of order onto existing chaos. The human visual cortex operates on the same principle. It actively constructs reality by separating signal from noise. This is constructive perception. The brain relies on internal rules and expectations to organize raw data into a coherent picture. The establishment of reality requires the aggressive drawing of boundaries. Meaning and life are impossible without this architecture of discernment. God's first action in the Genesis text is to speak light into existence. The mechanical action of the text shows a boundary being created, placing the light alongside the darkness to establish mutual exclusivity. The psychological equivalent of this primordial division is ordered contrast. As this diagram shows, figure-ground organization relies entirely on contrasting edges. The visual system extracts meaning from pure static by finding the boundaries between light and dark. Without this fundamental division between a target figure and pipeline background, object identification fails. The ancient text follows this division with an act of naming, calling the light day and the darkness night, asserting ancient sovereignty and order. This mirrors the cognitive act of categorization. We group objects and define them based on their potential for interaction and function. Categorizing an object by isolating it within a boundary is what brings it into functional reality. When the brain is deprived of these boundary cues and linear perspective, our perception of reality collapses. The Ames room illusion proves the mind's reliance on spatial categorization. We perceive a rectangular room with a tiny person and a giant person. The dashed lines reveal the room's true trapezoidal geometry. One corner is situated much further away. This works because the observer is restricted to a peephole, which removes the normal depth cues used to gauge distance. Lacking adequate data, the brain forces the space into a rectangular category. To maintain that internal rule, it hallucinates a massive difference in the physical size of the two identical figures. Size constancy, our ability to recognize that a person remains the same size regardless of distance, fails when these contextual boundaries are manipulated. The brain actively overrides physical reality to maintain its constructed categorical order. On the second day, the Genesis text establishes a vertical boundary, the firmament. This expanse separates the waters above from the waters below, creating an axis of safety and order. This vertical separation reflects the hierarchical organization of networks in the human visual system. Ascending or feed-forward pathways carry the bottom-up elemental features of perception from the primary sensory areas. Simultaneously, descending feedback connections exercise top-down modulation to organize the raw data. Higher-order areas, like the region responsible for identifying objects, cannot function if elementary stimulus features are missing from the layers below. In reverse, these top-down connections modulate the sensory areas, strengthening or weakening signals to maintain selective attention. Biological perception and ancient cosmological order both require a hierarchical vertical structure to filter chaos into a workable reality. On the third day, the Genesis text describes the gathering of the lower waters to reveal dry land, establishing a strict horizontal boundary. The chaotic sea is restricted to a localized area to form a habitable, bounded island. This drive towards separation and distinction is what brings individual things into being. Generalization effectively destroys an object as a living force. but it is strict distinction, or selfhood, that truly establishes an entity. The categorical systems we use to parse the world are derived from goal-directed behavior. We classify phenomena based on their motivational relevance. In the biblical landscape, dry land is categorized as safety and deep sea as a threat. Each area is assigned a specific motivational significance. Everything comes into being through boundaries. The restriction of chaos is what gives matter its reality. Genesis introduces biological life only after this 3-day architectural grid of vertical and horizontal boundaries is established. The text specifies vegetation yielding seed according to its kind, emphasizing reproduction restricted with strict categories. From a biological perspective, an organism must operate within a predictable, categorized environment to survive. If the environment remained a formless abyss, no organism could extract the sensory data necessary to recognize a threat or a food source. Biological existence is contingent on the pre-existing separation of order from chaos. Life cannot exist in a vacuum of discernment. This structural dependency is why the creation of light and the separation of darkness had to precede life. The human mind requires figure-ground organization to perceive, just as the ancient cosmos required the firmament to be habitable. Perceiving the world and existing meaningfully within it are active achievements. To live is to constantly engage in the act of division, separating signal from noise, safety from danger, and light from dark. Reality is an achievement. Existence requires the continuous, active separation of order from chaos.